Could Mary Poppins actually defeat Pennywise the Dancing Clown? Let's find out. All throughout childhood, there are tons of mythical beings that represent aspects of, well, just being a kid. Off the top of my head, we've got Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Queen of England. And just as these characters can represent positive aspects of our childhood, there are also characters that represent negative aspects, whether that's the monster under our bed, Krampus, One Piece fans. But on a serious note, if I were to pick two characters that represent these aspects of our whimsical childhood wonder, I would have to go with Pennywise and Mary Poppins. One of these characters represents the more positive, whimsical aspects, and Pennywise is literally an eldritch being that eats fear and thrives on children being terrified. So they're pretty much polar opposites, and it's for that reason I'm not surprised that this matchup in particular kind of blew up on the internet, as it's really something fun to think about. And seeing as how Pennywise has a new show out on HBO Max, I understand why the topic is hot. And seeing as how a lot of people also want to know how powerful both of these characters happen to be, I think that why not? Let's actually cover this matchup. I'm killing multiple birds with a stone. You guys get to know who wins the funny meme matchup, and you'll probably walk away with extended knowledge on both of these characters. So we're doing Pennywise versus Mary Poppins today. So if that sounds interesting to you, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 110 subscribers. This is a goal that I want to hit by the end of the year. We post tons of content, whether it's shorts throughout the week or long format videos such as what you're watching now every Friday at 3 p.m. We cover tons of things on the channel. As you can see, we're literally doing Pennywise and Mary Poppins of all things. So let's just say that my range is so wide that if you're interested in something, I'd probably cover it or plan to cover it in the near future. So with that shameless plug out the way, and I do mean shameless, subscribe. Let's get into the topic that you clicked the video to find out. Alright, from the get-go, I want to establish that I'm going to be using composite scaling for each of our characters here. Because I think that due to their, reality warping nature and their just abilities, I think just by keeping it comp, it's going to be a lot more fun. As we're going to have a whole bunch of feats we can talk about. And we're going to discuss multiple forms of media that these characters find themselves to be a part of. And I think that due to these characters being very whimsical reality warpers, I think comp, just, the idea that everything is on the table, is a lot more fitting to what a lot of people think this matchup happens to be like. So yeah, we're gonna do comp. But with that being said, we're still going to be doing lower ends first. So starting with Mary Poppins, as that's a character that most of you guys probably clicked the video to see power scaled. And starting off with her original Disney movies, and she doesn't really have that much going on for her. This is perhaps the most popular version of the character, but with that being said, she only has feats that are roughly capped in the wall to building level ranges, with these instances stemming from the fact that she's seemingly able to generate winds that can blow regular groups of people away, which gets up to around wall level. And during her return in the sequel, she splits a small section of clouds just by arriving, which gets up to around small building level. And that's pretty much all she's got. I guess for her speed, she would be around superhuman due to the fact that she's generating winds that are fast enough to blow people away, and she could just, fly over London. So that seems fair enough in my opinion. And honestly, it's kind of an underwhelming start, but seeing as how these films are more interested in showing her abilities under like a fun type of whimsical context rather than like JJK where they're just throwing beam attacks at each other, I think it's to be expected. But with that being said, there are still much stronger versions of the character that we can talk about during this section of the video. And trust me, the scaling's about to get really crazy. Moving on to her literary iterations, and this is where we start to see some substantial buffs to her attack potency. Starting with feats in the book, amongst a council of the physical embodiments of the sun and planets, she's held in very high regard, with them even saying they hail her. It's also important to note that she literally dances with the sun and even endears a kiss from him, only receiving a minor burn. Now, considering the guy is literally the sun, they literally say it multiple times. They don't even say that he's like the sun's avatar or, something that spawned from the sun. No, he's literally just the sun. Mary Poppins enduring a kiss from the guy would be really, really impressive. This is because the sun outputs enough energy to destroy multiple continents just in a single second. So you could probably unironically argue that she could endure nuclear bombs and stuff and the like, considering the fact that she's enduring energy that could wipe out multiple continents and just receiving a minor burn. And I know that sounds really crazy, and if you think that's a high end, honestly, fair enough, but considering the fact that she also has feats that that would include her literally pasting stars into the night sky. Like, she literally just goes into her basket, grabs a star, and then just pastes it onto the night sky. Seeing as how both of these feats sort of come back to her physicals, and you could argue that she's possibly a cosmic level character, with her reality warping capabilities being that potent as well. And honestly, I don't know what's crazier, the fact that it's honestly kind of consistent, or the fact that this is not even the strongest version of Mary Poppins. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is basically the Avengers if the team was made up of very prominent literary icons. So obviously you've got like Jekyll and Hyde, Tom Sawyer, Dr. Nemo, and a whole bunch of very famous literary icons. And it's from this story where we find perhaps the strongest version of Mary Poppins. As while she's not a member of the team, her role in the universe is far greater, as she's unironically the stand-in for God. As she's unironically just a universal deity. She's not in the story for very long, but what she has is very impressive, as she's a full-on reality warper, and she's a being who's existed before time began, and her only feat is defeating the Antichrist, like just low diffing him. And all throughout the exchange, it's implied that she made the universe. So unironically, if we're gonna use comp Mary Poppins, she's really cracked, as just using this version of the character alone, she would be around universal due to her status, and she would have immeasurable speed due to existing before time. So with that being said, arguably Mary Poppins does live up to her hype. Let's see if we could say the same about Pennywise. At first glance, Pennywise might just be your average slasher villain, and he has feats that reflect that. Obviously, he gets the better part of human beings. Literally all throughout his series, he eats people, for crying out loud. But as we come to find out throughout the series, Pennywise is actually an alien. And it's when diving into this fact we find a lot of his much more impressive feats. As for starters, just by crashing onto the planet Earth, he caused a town-level crater, and that's just by using the film continuity. If you want to use the book continuity, this feat gets a lot higher. Due to the way that it's described in this excerpt right here, you could actually argue that this crash yielded a blast comparable to energy that would be required to destroy mountains at a low end to even islands at a high end. And Pennywise literally survived that point blank. This is consistent, as he's a character who can casually conjure up storms to a city level yield. But for higher ends, it's said that upon his defeat, he caused a massive earthquake that was said to be greater than the 1960 Valdivia earthquake, with the radiated energy from this event being around mountain level, with the total seismic energy of the event actually being comparable to what would be required to destroy some countries. So unironically, Pennywise is actually very cracked. But there's a higher end. It's kind of a little bit of broad thing going on, as in both the book and both of the media adaptations of said book, Pennywise refers to himself as the Eater of Worlds. So you could probably argue that his actual avatar is a planetary force. He doesn't really have any feats that, substantiate this claim, but you could possibly argue that the casual country level stuff is a bit of something that you can use. I don't know. But this is not the cap of Pennywise's power, as Pennywise is a very powerful being in his true form. We just went over the avatar. And as we'll see, the true form is an entirely different beast. And in order to scale the true form, we're gonna have to go over the cosmology of Stephen King. And thankfully for myself, I don't have to really recite it all again because I talked about it in my last video here. So I'm gonna just put a 2-minute section of that video onto this video. And I think it does a good job of explaining the cosmology of Stephen King. And once I'll come back, I'll explain how Pennywise actually scales to say cosmology. The easiest way to really get my point across is just to explain the Dark Tower and its relationship to existence, as it serves as a nexus to every story and universe that exists in the Stephen King world. And obviously it upscales the base multiverse. Well, how big is said multiverse? And let's dive into that, as in the Dark Tower 1, an analogy is made, and try to hold on because it's pretty out there. So essentially, just imagine a desert, and then imagine one individual grain of sand in that desert. That grain that we have in our hands here is its own universe. Now, keep in mind that each universe has the capacity to spawn its own individual hierarchy of universes. So unironically, each universe can spawn an infinite amount of other universes. And that's just one grain of sand. And imagine an entire desert's worth of this stuff. And all of it all comes back to the Dark Tower, meaning that at worst, the Dark Tower would arguably be a 6-dimensional construct. But this is still a very massive lowball, as going back to our desert analogy, imagine each grain of sand once again, and how I've talked about how each grain of sand has the capacity to have infinite universes spawn from it? Well, it's also alluded to that each universe that spawns from this individual universe is a dimensional length greater than the last. So, unironically, you've got a 3D universe, and a 4D universe, and a 5D universe, all the way up to infinity. This is substantiated in the text as the system is likened to atoms resting upon the surface of a leaf, while those atoms possessing a reality of their own that remain almost imperceivable within the greater structure that is the grain of sand. This would make the Stephen King multiverse at least an outerversal construct, and the Dark Tower being the nexus point of all of this would upscale to such levels. And I know what you're thinking, well, who scales to the Dark Tower? And honestly, a lot of people do. And to start to get into why this is the case, we're going to have to talk about Pennywise's connections to Mature and the Turtle, this giant universal sized turtle, as Pennywise's true form is the complete opposite and like cosmic equal to this being. This is important because Maturin literally holds the Dark Tower on his shell, so he's a being that is way larger and bigger than this outerversal construct that we just talked about. So Pennywise being a cosmic being of equal stature would mean that he upscales to comparable levels, meaning that a true form Pennywise would unironically be around outerversal. So off that alone, it must sound like she really just, oh yeah, Pennywise is a she. I forgot to mention that. But anyways, it might sound like Pennywise does in Mary Poppins, who caps around universal when using comp. And well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And this is ultimately because Pennywise has like two really big weaknesses that I think Mary Poppins, especially the universal one we talked about, can exploit. As Pennywise has a weakness to imagination and pure willpower / belief. Now, obviously, you can't just look at Pennywise and believe you can beat him, and that won't work, right? But we saw how having such strong willpowers on top of possessing the Shining-esque ability that connects all of Stephen King's stories was able to benefit the Losers Club in their defeat of Pennywise, as these characters, once again, had the shine and they believed in themselves, and because of that, simple household items were able to do critical damage to Pennywise while they were confronting him. And two, Pennywise doesn't get his outerversal scaling unless he's in his realm specifically, as it's actually stated that Pennywise has to abide by the rules of the universe, meaning that the guy is actually nerfed when he's in our world, meaning that only the avatar scaling would actually be usable in a fight like this, where Pennywise would more than likely get rolled up on by Mary Poppins. And that's ultimately what this fight comes down to, where they're fighting, as if they're fighting in our universe. So let's use the meme hypothetical where people are saying that we need Mary Poppins to come in to Derry, Maine and help these kids, right? If that were to happen, Mary Poppins actually saves the losers and the other groups of children that Pennywise is trying to eat during his feeding sessions. As Mary Poppins is pretty much like the embodiment of imagination and pretty much all things whimsical. So unlike the physical plane, she just outscales him, and she arguably is like pretty much just his kryptonite. But with that being said, if Pennywise were to somehow lure Mary Poppins outside of the universe into his true realm, then Mary Poppins is cooked, as that guy's just straight up outerversal. So in conclusion, this matchup has two different outcomes, with the winners just depending on the environment of all things. So overall, we've got two win cons, one for each character, with each outcome just not even being close. So yeah, that's my take on this week's video. I want to thank you guys for actually clicking on today's video, and it was pretty fun to do. Be sure to let me know if you want to see more Stephen King or Pennywise scaling, or heck, you want to see more Mary Poppins and Disney stuff. Whatever your thoughts is, just let me know in the comment section down below. But as always, I'll see you guys next week with another video. But until then, stay big G fans.